One of the things that I've always admired you for is your textbooks
Oh,
and your linear algebra book, which is really very different, and your functional analysis book, again, very different from the others one finds out there. Can you say a little bit about how they developed and what's different about them?
I taught the subjects for 40 years and I had extensive lecture notes. Now, my thinking about functional analysis was the abstract theory was developed in order to solve concrete problems. And therefore, for a textbook, it was equally important to present the abstract theory and to point out how it's applied to concrete problems. So I had the book, in the book, chapters alternate. There's one chapter that explains the abstract theory, the next chapter describes how it's used. I think that's the right way to do it. The only other textbook that does that is Yoshida's book on functional analysis. That has a lot of applications. Mine is perhaps a little more systematic, but that's a great book. Now, linear algebra, I always loved the subject and developed my own way. Well, I can't really say my own way, but I taught it as a first year sort of baby graduate course. Actually, it could be taught as a senior undergraduate course. It's not an introductory course, but it's a second course on linear algebra, and I think an undergraduate program in mathematics should have a second course in linear algebra. And I put into it everything I loved about the subject.
I remember that at the very beginning you say this linear algebra book, unlike others, doesn't start with Gaussian elimination.
That's right. That's right.
That's somehow the key there.
Yes, yes.
You also wrote a calculus book,
That's right.
and it's different too. How?
Well, it was, first of all, I wrote in the 70s. It was the first book that used computing and emphasized applications. Secondly, my approach to many of the topics was subtly and in some cases not so subtly different from the standard calculus books. Standard calculus books are, well, standard. It hasn't changed much, and it doesn't represent the way mathematicians think about the subject. Just to give an example, integration by parts. That's represented as a technique for turning integrals into a form where you can guess, where you can find an antiderivative and getting an explicit expression. That's the least important part. Integration by parts is used, for instance, to show that a certain integral is positive, because if you do an integration by parts, it becomes the integrand becomes a square. So, for instance, conservation of energy you obtain that way. Another very important use of it is if you want to evaluate an integral by numerical integration, if the integrand is singular, then the numerical integration converges very slowly. But you can, by integration by parts, turn the integral into one where the integrand is smooth, gets integrated a number of times, and so it's much easier to evaluate. None of that appears in the standard calculus books. So, in just about every topic, I found ways of improving it.
And I understand that this book is going to have a second edition.
That's right. I'm working with a very good collaborator, Maria Terrell at Cornell, who is in charge of the teaching of calculus, and she has a very good judgment of just what is too much for undergraduate students or written in a style too mathematical, and similarly what is too much for instructors who pick a book. Instructors are rather conservative, so one must take that into account and go into the new approaches. For instance, the notion of uniform continuity. That's a much more natural notion, the continuity at every point. And it's a simpler concept. Continuity at every point has one more quantifier in the definition. Each quantifier makes the definition that much harder to understand. But uniform continuity is a more natural concept. Uniform convergence of a sequence of functions regarded as very advanced concept. It isn't. You can see when a function converges to a limit, gets closer and closer at every point, eventually you can barely distinguish. I don't see why it's such an advanced concept.
Maybe with with computation that can easily be done in the classroom or at home, the book is finally, the times have caught up with your book.
Of course, other books also use a lot of computing. I think ours was by far the first.